Well, welcome to 2014. It's going to be a great year. We have a lot of stuff to do in a very short session. 59 days, 54 days, whatever we come up with, goes quickly. And really, a lot of times people say, well, what are you going to do? And we're going to stay with the same agenda that we had last year as far as jobs, education, the budget. If you look at in those areas, we still have a lot of work to do. All the surveys out there, there was a recent Elway poll, what's most important? And when people come down to it, it's jobs and the economy. It's those kitchen table issues, and that's really what we're trying to focus on in the Senate. What are those kitchen table issues that really matter to Washingtonians? And we got a lot of work to do. CNBC came out with a report that Washington is the 5th most expensive state to do business in. So clearly, we have work to do in workers' compensation. There's work to do as far as the water quality issues to make sure that not only are the Boeings of the world and the Warehousers of the world, but our municipalities, our water systems, and both medium and small business. We got a lot more to do. We did a great job with Boeing. That was phenomenal. I don't know if people really appreciate the magnitude of that. I think 5 or 10 years from now, people will go, wow, that really was a big deal. But to me, that's one of those game changer events, and we were able to hold on to that. But there's more that we need to do to spur economic development. We still have a lot of work to do on the education front, both in K through 12, early learning, and higher ed. We're going to be dealing with the McCleary decision, for years to come. But education is more than just about investments. Education is about making sure every student has the skills and knowledge necessary to compete in what's going to be a very competitive global world. The global economy, we're not turning back on that. I was over in China a couple years ago. There's 100 million Chinese that know English. There's a lot of pressures on our kids as far as from wage rates and others that they're really going to have to step up their game, and we're going to need to have an education system that fits that. When it comes to the budget, we want to make sure that we continue the good work that we did this previous year. And really, I think the things that we did there that were so outstanding, one, we changed the conversation. This is the first time in 5 years that we're not talking about a deficit, and that's because when we passed that 4-year balanced budget the year before, we were able to incorporate that into this, and it really is a truth in budgeting that leads to good things, so that when you come back that next year, it's not just about cuts, but how do you move forward. The other thing that I think we did, and really the paramount change, was if you look at everybody that comes down here, non-educational expenditures have outpaced education growth by 2 to 1 for the last 30 years. So it's not an anomaly. For 30 years, that's been the case. No matter what politicians say when they come down to Washington to talk about the paramount duty of this state, when they get to Olympia, they don't make education truly their paramount duty. And we changed that. If you look at the growth in spending as far as our investments, we had a 12% increase in K through 12 and a 2.6% increase in non-educational expenditures. And I think that's really the story of the Majority Coalition Caucus and what we were able to do last year, and we're going to continue those good works this year.
Can you keep with your present stance of reforms and not getting into the money, new revenue or new appropriations like they've been following for the last year? Essentially, the Supreme Court is saying that's not how we see the decision.
Well, we can amply fund education, which we will do by continuing to prioritize education. That's really what this caucus is about, is making sure that we prioritize. We just don't talk about education, we prioritize it, and we prioritize it in our budget. If you look at funding those increases going forward, and you can talk to Senator Hill on this, if you just limit non-educational expenditures, not just where they are today, but with population and inflation, if that's all you do, instead of add-on programs every year like we normally do, If you just keep that limiter, we can more than fund this without new revenue. And that's going to be the direction of the Senate. We're going to continue to press forward with a great education system. We're still in a very tentative economic and business environment, and we want to make sure that when businesses are thinking about expanding or relocating, that Washington is competitive, and we have a long ways to go. John, Jared.
Senator Chesler, the governor, in his address raised some interesting issues. I wonder if you could comment on his speech, and in particular, the 3 points: the $200 million for education, the minimum wage, and calling out on the Senate, in particular your caucus, your members, to pass a transportation.
Sure. Let me hope I remember all the questions rolled into one, Jerry. But, first of all, the governor wrote a budget, submitted it, and I think one of my colleagues said he already tore it up and is drafting a new one based on taxes. Very short on detail. I don't recall any details on what taxes the governor is going to raise, how much or when. He doesn't know how much he's going to raise the minimum wage, how much better than first in the nation he wants us to be, I really don't know. Climate change, there's no specifics. Might be an executive order, might propose legislation, we don't know. He left a lot of vagueness out there in those areas. I never thought I'd say it, but I miss the statesmanship of his predecessors who didn't call out individual caucuses in the past.
Okay. One of the things that I noticed was that last Thursday, the governor was saying to us at the AP Legislative Forum that he was going to be presenting some bold new issues, bold new ideas on climate change. But he seemed to pretty much completely drop that, and instead went ahead and started talking about there was going to be a big tax debate this session. So I was wondering, well, first off, how do you think that Supreme Court's decision has changed things? And second, what do you think about this whole idea that suddenly taxes are the central issue?
They always have been with Jay. I mean, since day one, that's been the go-to issue. We heard about lean management was going to save everything. Well, lean management is what the backfills are in the budget. Taxes are the order of the day. I mean, you go back a year ago, we proposed a really good higher education package with no taxes. Jay proposed exactly the same thing with taxes. That's the clear difference in philosophies between the governor and the folks you see here at this table today, Eric.
Senator, will you support his call to go ahead and restore the teacher COLAs?
I think that we have to look at where do we get the best bang for our buck. The governor also hasn't shown us how he expects to pay for it. It's yet another detail. There are no proposal to pay for it, no proposal to pay for anything. It's just, I want to spend, and I want to tax, but we don't get any specifics.
You got to remember it's a supplemental year and it's a supplemental budget, and generally those are technical corrections. You don't have large-scale policy corrections in that. So we're going to look at the numbers, but usually, especially something of that magnitude, would be done at the beginning of the biennium.
Your thoughts on the minimum wage proposal?
Well, we already have the highest minimum wage in the country. If cities like Seattle want to experiment, I think the market will clearly show that, as I keep saying, McGinn filled up Bellevue's office spaces. If they want to raise it to 15, they can fill up all of our restaurants and all of our retail. So if they want to go down that direction, God bless them.
But would a little more statewide really hurt?
Well, let me look at this. I represent 3 border counties. Today in eastern Washington, our minimum wage is more than $2 above Idaho. If you take the governor literally, that would be $4.50 an hour difference between places like Clarkston, Pullman, Tico, the city of Spokane Valley are competing with people with a $4.50 an hour lower minimum wage, lower workers' comp costs, lower unemployment insurance costs. We compete daily in border counties. And when you're already behind in some of those key areas, some things just make it worse.
So no is your answer.
In my district it is.
And the same in my district. In my opinion, if you raise the minimum wage, you're going to have more small businesses go out of business, which means more people will lose jobs. It's the wrong direction.
Well, and we are the most internationally trade-dependent state in the country, which means that we're dealing with a lot of commodities items as well, which means we have to be able to compete nationally for those commodities type products out there, especially in the agriculture industry. And as was mentioned earlier, we're already $2 an hour above Idaho. I don't know about you, but a bushel of potatoes on the commodities market only sells for so much. And if we're going to kill ourselves by raising those wages again much, much higher than we already are, those are things that I don't think have really been considered properly as we move forward.
Senator, would you like to see a lower minimum wage? Would that be ideal?
I think that we need to make sure we're competitive. And we've already talked about the highest minimum wage in the country. We've got workers' comp issues. We've got insurance issues that the governor even mentioned today, as far as us being more expensive in some areas. We've already got more mandates. One of the things that I was a little concerned about that he did seem to say was a bipartisan success was our health care issue. We know we've got about 400,000 people that have lost their health care. Is that the success we're going to be talking about in the future? I thought that the promises were we weren't going to lose your health. You weren't going to lose your health care if you didn't want to. You weren't going to lose your doctor if you wanted to keep them, and your rates were going to stay down. And I've seen at least 2 of those 3 things have gone the other way, so I could hardly call that a success.
Senator Tom, what did you think of the governor's description of WashDOT?
Obviously, it has a long ways to go. If you look at just where the public's at, clearly when 4 union jobs can block a multi-billion-dollar project for over a month, we have problems. And that's what the public sees. So that's why we've been so adamant about the reforms to show people, granted, the projects are needed, we need to move forward, but we need to build value. People just don't want us putting, just like in education, dollars into the same old system that they don't think gives them value. And if you look at the magnitude of just the tunnel bore and the 520 pontoons, those are the stories that resonate with people. That's what sticks in their mind. We still have a long, long ways to go. What we really should be doing is extrapolating the lessons, and that's what we've tried to do with our reforms from the Mount Vernon, the bridge there. 27 days. Granted, that was great. But let's take those ideas as far as how agencies can work together, how we can have great environmental protections and still do things in an expedient manner instead of having this long, long cycle that does nothing but increase costs and it adds no value to the citizens of Washington State.
Well, what reforms would you be happy with and would get you to support a package that would have avoided Bertha, would have avoided the pontoon problem? I mean, what sort of concrete things do you want?
Well, obviously, those several of those items are administrative. That's, a couple years ago we put the governor in charge of, DOT. That is fully under his purview. He's fully responsible for that. He could have stepped in on the tunnel as far as the 4 jobs blocking a multi-billion-dollar project, but no, he decided not to. So those kind of administrative efficiencies, that's up to the governor to show where he's making a difference. Now, the things that we're trying to do is, things like sales tax. We're one of only 4 states where their transportation projects get charged sales tax. When people pay, whether it's tolls or gas tax, they want those dollars to go to transportation and not to be funneled off into some other non-transportation expenditure.
The governor says he was candidly admitting that he's rethought his issue or the funding of education this session. Any of you rethinking the approach there? Does money need to be set aside this session?
No, I think what we've said consistently is, our bar isn't the Supreme Court. Our bar is not a bare minimum. What we're trying to do is make sure our kids have an incredible world-class education system, and that's why it's going to take more than just dollars. It's going to take fundamental reforms. When the principal is not in charge of that school, they have no control over who's in the class and who's out of the class. I mean, I'll keep going back to my Seahawks scenario. Can you imagine Pete Carroll not having any, say into who gets on the field and off the field, and the only way that you do that is seniority only? They would not be in the playoffs on Sunday. And we have something far more important than football in the classroom, and we need to make sure that our kids are getting the proper shake, are getting a great education so that they can compete for those jobs.
So when do you address the money issues?
We're addressing, John, we addressed the money issue this last time with over $1 billion, $1.6 billion, John, let me finish, $1.6 billion in total K through 12, $338 million in higher education. The first time in 26 years, there's no tuition increase. I mean, that is making education your top priority, your paramount duty, and understanding the importance of education in driving an economy forward.
So when we built, and if I may, we've been building the education system in this state, you know, like any other thing. You've got to build it one brick at a time. And it's not as if we've got this unlimited amount of resources out there to be able to deal with what we already acknowledge is something we want to do. And that is that I mean, for Pete's sake, it was the Republicans that ran the Fund Education First bill back in 2006. But it took McClary to get a hearing. This has been a focus for us for many, many years. I mean, we're working on 8 years this has been a focus for us. Now, that being said, when it comes to our priorities and how we're spending our money, we all know this, as much as we want to fix these problems right away, there's only so much money available right now. We're trying in this fragile economy to get things turned around in a respectful way because just as we saw with the aerospace issue that came up in November. I mean, we've got things like that that are going to be massive impacts negatively on our economy if we're not careful. The policy decisions that we make today, we've got to be looking out ahead as to, is this going to create for us an atmosphere that's going to be conducive and supportive of us growing not only our economy, but in the lieu of growing our economy, our education system benefits from it. Our transportation system benefits from it. Our healthcare system benefits from it. All these things that we talk about that we want government to do are all predicated upon the fact that we've got a thriving, growing economy. And so the decisions that we make, we're not just looking at the end of our noses in these decisions. We're trying to make sure it's a sustainable system out there, and that it's not just a one of those one-liners where we say, hey, we just threw a bunch of money into it, but then we couldn't afford it tomorrow. We want to make sure we can afford it tomorrow and that we can grow it tomorrow as well.
But do you share the governor's urgency for a transportation package this session?
I want to make sure, and I've been very clear on this all the way, starting last year, while my colleagues acknowledge that there are a lot of problems and needs in the transportation area, we've got to make sure, just like with our economy, we're doing it in a proper way, in a sustainable way. I've been here for the previous two packages that were done in 2003 and 2005. There were some big mistakes made. And there has to be an acknowledgement, as you folks have been sharing with the public so well over the course of the last year, of some of the struggles that we're dealing with in our transportation system. Not only in the lack of having proper transportation in areas, but also the mistakes that have been made. And I haven't met a constituent or a citizen yet that's not a little concerned about hundreds of millions of dollars worth of mistakes that have been made by one department that at the end of the day, the taxpayers are responsible for. We've got to change that. Other states have been on that road for many years, changing the responsibilities there. We are serious. We've got to change how we do business in Washington State. There is no excuse for Washington State to be the most expensive place in the country to build a road or a bridge. There's no excuse for that. And that's without exception. And so we have some ideas, some policy changes, some reforms, some accountability measures that we are going to stand strong on when it comes to, yes, we acknowledge there's transportation needs, but we're not going to continue to take the taxpayers' dollars and flush it down or sink it in a lake or do whatever with it. We want to make sure that it's really going to be spent well. That's our job. That's why the taxpayers sent us here, was to be good stewards of what they're giving us.
Has the majority coalition polled its own members on whether you support Senator King's current stance? Have you polled your own members yet on that?
Well, we've been very clear. It takes 60 votes out of the House to pass the transportation package. It takes 30 votes out of the Senate. That's why we have been continuing to say, let's get everybody in a room, let's negotiate. If we're going to have an agreement, it's going to be a broad, bipartisan agreement. It's not going to be this narrowly crafted that just skids through the doors. And so that's what we're after. That's what we're going to be working on. And again, when you're looking at a $10 to $12 billion package, it's going to have a public vote. And with that public vote comes the public scrutiny that we need the value that the public can see so that we don't just say yes here in Olympia, but when we say yes, the voters affirm that vote.
Okay, Senator King put out a press release yesterday calling for the governor to use this speech to clarify his position with regard to low carbon fuel standards. And obviously, the governor didn't say a word about it. So I'm wondering, what do you think about the governor's silence about whether he's going to be imposing low carbon fuel standards at the same time you're debating gas tax?
It complicates matters. Consumers, truckers are all concerned of that complicating factor because they haven't had a clear issue or clear question or answer. The other thing that was interesting, the governor has bragged about the vote the House took. And every time he speaks, he talks about the Sluice River Coulee City Railroad through eastern Washington. But that package he's so proud of spent $0 on that rail system. So there's some conflicts there. What a wonderful package, what a wonderful bill, but not a nickel for a railroad that covers most of eastern Washington. So there's a lot of flaws there.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that too. You know, we heard a long speech. There's absolutely no clarity in anything. A year ago, he didn't submit a budget. He submitted something that Ross Hunter said was a budget thing. Yesterday, he submitted a budget to the House and then rhetorically tore it up today. He talked about tax increases, but he didn't say what. Talks about a gas tax increase. Talks about a minimum wage increase. Doesn't say how much. And, you know, how can we operate? How can the people of Washington operate if you have all that? And then on top of it, you also have a discussion about carbon standards that can add up to $1 per gallon of the gas that people need to drive around and do their business. And then on top of all that, feed their families. The governor is full of ideas, absolutely zero specifics.
If there's broad bipartisan agreement, it is on that the governor needs to be very clear his intentions on where he's going to go with climate change. Senator King has been very clear on that. Senator Eide has been very clear on that. And Representative Claiborne has been very clear on that. So that's not a partisan issue. I mean, the governor needs to clarify that so that the citizens of Washington State, if they are going to be making a decision, know the totality of that decision. To think that an action that might add up to an additional $1 has no consequences just makes no sense. It makes no sense in the public, and it certainly doesn't make sense in Olympia. And I think it adds a huge cloud that if we're going to move forward, we need to make sure that that cloud is clear.
Well, and if I may, though, too, just to continue on this, one of the big concerns I think that we also share is this. While we all are supportive of moving forward and finding some solutions here, there's a key element that's being missed, and that's what's the economic impact? There's been no economic impact study of this, and my biggest concern, along with many of my colleagues, is what's going to happen to the middle class, the working class in Washington State when ultimately they have to pay for all this stuff? You start adding that dime a gallon, you start adding that $1 a gallon for carbon, you start adding, you know, all the fees, all the things, the cost of goods. You increase the minimum wage, it creates an increase in your cost of goods as well. When you go to that restaurant, that burger is going to cost more. Why? Because labor is more. That burger is going to cost more. Why? Because carbon's more. That burger is going to cost more. Why? Because the fuel to get the burgers there in the first place is more. What are you going to do? You're going to have to pay more for that burger. And so there's an impact, especially on the middle class here, that's not being talked about. And I think that's a key thing that we need to make sure that all of us are keeping right on the forefront of these decisions as we move forward, because it's great to talk pie in the sky about all these great ideas, but at the end of the day, it's got to be paid for.
Back to
What do you think about the governor's idea to drop the B&O tax for small businesses with under $50,000 in annual revenues?
Good for one little group, but it's a tax shift. There's no specifics on it. I mean, great, $50,000 a year gross or less, that's great for one little group of people. And you know, for a state that's supposed to have one of the largest startups, I can see it as a small shot in the arm. But who's going to pay the difference? Why are we not doing things like this? Like we've been doing this for years. We picked winners and losers. We had this discussion in November. Why aerospace? Why not everybody? Why do we keep doing this, picking winners and losers in every sector of our economy, whether it be those startups?
Who would make up the difference for that?
Having an economy, going back to what I said earlier, creating an atmosphere where every sector of the economy can thrive and grow does nothing but one thing, and that's create more tax revenue, because more people are working. And if the more people we have getting a paycheck, the more pay stubs, which are the taxes, are coming to us to pay for all those things that we're all talking about today.
And that's really the big differences between what we're trying to accomplish and I think where the governor's headed. The governor's idea of how you grow an economy is you grow it through the public sector. You grow it through by having more government employees. What we're trying to do is grow it by creating an atmosphere where businesses can thrive. We have incredible workers out there. We have incredible companies. I always hate to mention the list of companies we have here in Washington because we have so many. You're going to miss a bunch. You know, you can start with the Amazons, the Microsofts, the Costcos, the Nordstroms. You know, we have hundreds and hundreds of great companies. What we need to do is create that atmosphere where we get out of their way, let them thrive, let the economy grow, and from that growth, we can do amazing things. We're not going to be able to do it by just going back to the taxpayer, seeing what last nickel they have in their pocket and asking for it.
The King County Executive just called for a ballot measure for a transit tax on April 22nd in King County. Does that place additional pressure on the Senate to pass a transportation measure?
Again, you know, we're focused on getting everybody in the room, see what we can do to come together with a broad bipartisan agreement that can get 60 votes in the House, can get 30 votes in the Senate, and will withstand public scrutiny.
But do you fear, though, that if King County goes off on its own, that there would be far less support for a state transportation package?
You know, I've often said I think what we're trying to do here is a generational decision, because I think if you do let transit go, okay, and you lose that element of the package as far as support, I don't know how you cobble together a 50% solution as far as from a tax vote from the public standpoint to go forward with a roads package. The one thing I think we learned in going with our 10-city listening tour that the Senate went on, there's a lot of need, and I don't care if you're visiting Vancouver or Wenatchee or the Tri-Cities or downtown Seattle or Spokane, there's needs across the state, and we need to make sure that we have a system that works for everybody. We also need to make sure we have a system that works for the dense core of you know, the Puget Sound region, Kingston, Snohomish, Pierce. Senator King's package does that. It gives those local options. I think that that's really the way to go, is make sure that we can add value, show value to the voters, and have a package that works for everybody. I mean, the 520 bridge is a perfect example. Okay, King County runs out and passes a transit bill, okay? What good does that do when you have a multi-billion-dollar bridge, we've spent billions on it so far, that will end on the western shores of Lake Washington? You'll have 3 lanes going into 2 lanes. You'll have an inside transit lane going to an outside transit lane. You want to talk about gridlock. If we don't get something together, and if they go at it alone, and we can't pass a roads package, that is going to become the poster child. If I'm South Carolina, I hop up in a helicopter, I take a picture of it, and I say, is this really a state that you want to do business in?
On McCleary, it looks like you're not interested in the supplemental budget cycle here, putting more revenue into schools, more spending into schools. You don't want to raise revenue to accomplish that. But how else do you see yourselves responding to the court order from last week?
Well, you know, there's a higher authority than the court, though. There's people that live in this state, and they've been pretty clear that they're opposed to tax increases right now. People are hurting. And, you know, the court can have a ruling. I think the original McCleary decision was a good wake-up call for the legislature. But if they want to start spelling things out, they're going to have to answer to the public just like we do. You know, they have to run for election. And what I'm hearing and what we're hearing and what we're hearing in the polls that have been done is that the public is not interested in tax increases right now. And that's basically what the Supreme Court is pushing, is tax increases. You know, you heard the governor's speech, a lot of wants, very few specifics. I jotted down, we're going to solve that through lean. The governor's office is a pretty good example of how lean works, if you want to see a bloated budget. Tax incentives, you know, they're evil one minute, and the next minute we've got to give them to Boeing to make that work. So which is it? You know, you're not going to fund all of this wish list with either one of those.
Well, here's a way to ask that question in a more pointed fashion. No, I'm interested in the response from both caucuses on this one. Are you guys going to cooperate with the Supreme Court order to come up with a plan by April 30th for a $5 billion tax increase?
No, you don't need a tax increase. I mean, what we have been very clear about, and if the Supreme Court wants to jump in the game and become legislators and do what we're trying to do, and that is prioritize education, well, let them have at it. But it's very clear from a constitutional standpoint that the Supreme Court can't add new taxes. They can't impose new taxes on the citizens of Washington State. So what we're trying to do is make sure we have programs in place that we prioritize, just like we did this past year, in moving forward, making sure that education truly is our paramount duty. But it's, again, not just about dollars. It's about making sure we have an education system. And in order to have that, I would love to see the Supreme Court start to impose some of these great reforms. We had 13 reform bills that Senator Lutzow had constructed come out of the Senate last year. Are they going to start mandating those? But again, we need to make sure we have a higher bar. We're there for the kids. We're there for a great education system, but it's going to take both investment and reforms.
I didn't read the lines in the order that must have said that you had to raise taxes. And I thought all along your caucus had believed that full funding of basic education could be done without new taxes. I think the court order was asking for a plan for how you were going to get the money allocated. So do you see yourselves answering that and producing some kind of plan for full funding, showing how you actually get to full funding by 2018, and doing that by the end of April this year?
I think that, if I may, let's also remember that we're not allowed to bind future legislatures. And so while we want to and are working on putting together a plan to fully fund the McCleary decision by 2018, it's a suggestion list to the following legislators that are going to follow us as we pass on our baton someday when we're no longer here. And that's on any issue. And so while I appreciate, the fact that the court thinks it's an important issue, as do we, there's also a separation of powers here too. Their job is to be the judiciary branch. Our job is to be the legislative branch. And then there's an executive branch in there somewhere too. And we've got to make sure that we're actually doing the jobs that we were hired by the public to do. And while I appreciate their strong concerns, what I don't appreciate is the fact that it almost comes across as like they want to do both our jobs. And if that's what they want to do, let them run for legislators as well.
Yes or no on April 30th deadline?
We are working towards a plan, yes.
Okay, and Senate?
Yeah, we'll have a plan. I mean, if you look at Senator Hill has been very specific as far as the details moving forward, how we do this. You just have to make sure that we don't continue to, if you look at the big difference, and this is what people have to understand, between the Senate's original budget and the governor's budget. We always talk about kids and it's for education, okay? But from an education standpoint, the budgets were the same. The $1 billion of new taxes he had, 75% of that was for non-educational expenditures. That's what this is about. This is not about education. This is about how can we raise money for non-educational expenditures. And we know the public doesn't have an appetite for that, so let's use the kids. That's not what we're going to do. We're going to do what people told us to do when they elected us, and that is come down to Olympia, prioritize education, make it your paramount duty, and let's move forward.